All right, everyone, welcome. There's so many people here excited to talk about tax. We got an exciting agenda for you guys today. We're going to talk about how to file your taxes and different tax laws and things like that. Just kidding. So I want to present here, we've got Mark, really appreciate his time from tax.com. He's going to talk about how they leverage IDP solutions. So we're going to talk a little bit as well about the evolution of intelligent document processing to where it's gotten us to today, where we're starting to be able to use generative AI to be able to process documents. And you saw a lot of it, of course, at the session this morning. I encourage anyone that is interested to see more about the technology to go to our demo booth, where you can kind of dig into it and see how it works. So we're going to kind of touch at a high level. I also want this session to be interactive, so Mark and I are just going to kind of talk. Please feel free if you guys have any questions, want to go off on a tangent, we're happy to. But to kick things off, I'm sure you guys have heard this a number of times today, so just a brief safe harbor statement. We're going to be talking about future capabilities of the product. Nothing we say here is a guarantee that these features will be in the product, so if it's magic, don't believe me. All right, there's our title slide. So with that, I'll let Mark talk a little bit about who tax.com is and a little bit about his division and what they do.
All right, I know we stand between you and a happy hour right now, so we're gonna make it as quick and easy as possible. My name's Mark Rodriguez. I'm a director in our innovation group at tax.com. Tax.com is a subsidiary of Ryan LLC. If you haven't heard of Ryan LLC, we're a global tax software and service provider. Tax.com is the software end of that spectrum. We've been in the market for over 30 years, building out software solutions for practitioners, by practitioners. Feel free to go to the next slide, where we talk a little bit about the different practice areas that we have available, from property tax, unclaimed property, indirect tax, transfer pricing, grants, credits, and incentives. So if you like taxes, you want to talk about taxes, you want to talk about software in taxes, I am excited to do that. But thankfully, we're not going to do that today. We work in the innovation group. So this is a small piece of the tax.com group where we sit closely to our service deliveries, the folks that are actually doing the consulting with our clients, looking for tax opportunities. We have really three main strategic objectives. The first one's revenue growth. We want to look and identify new service lines. So we're constantly partnering with our different leaders in our business practices to identify new opportunities. We also want to help them with strategic sales support. So if there's questions that they have, if there's issues that they have with a particular challenge from a client or a company, we want to help them be able to take on that project, and we want to provide market eminence. The middle one is where we spend most of our time. This is probably 60 to 70% of our time is around operational excellence, looking to drive operational efficiencies within our practices, looking at taking our clients from a small, or practices from all of the Excel work papers that they have today to more enterprise-grade solutions with digital transformation journeys. And then finally, helping them with technology enablement programs. We have a Center of Excellence for Automation Anywhere, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is where that operational excellence category lives. And then finally, research and development. We want to help with R&D projects. We want to do market research, lead innovation thought and workshops. And of course, if you had to add a sub-bullet, probably generative AI, explore more there, right? I'm sure everybody's heard of generative AI by now. Show of hands. There we go. We got some hands in there. I love it. All right. I'll learn how to work this button here soon. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Automation Anywhere at tax.com. We've been using it since 2019. The main catalyst and the reason why we're here today is because we had one practice area that was reviewing 1.5 million invoices a year. And one of the value differentiators for our group is that we are actually physically looking at those invoices. So today, we're still looking at 1.5 million invoices. We're just doing it in a much more condensed timeline. So it's always going to be, we're looking at those many documents, but we've established a COE model. We have over nearly about 40 bot creator licenses between onshore and offshore. We have 1,500 IQ bot learning instances in production. Yes, we just built these as quickly as we can because we love it, the standard form templates. We've used this across sales and use tax, property tax, and oil and gas for severance tax and other types of reports that we need to get extracted. And then we also have been using document classifier to do the sorting. Has everyone heard of document classifier? All right, it's a great tool that Automation Anywhere has. It really, think of it as being able to create templates and feed it into large PDF, and it can sort them into the different templates that match. So it's document sorting on steroids, as I like to say it. And then we use the doc automation, using those predefined templates from AP invoices, and even playing around with the generative AI. And I would second, if you haven't stopped by the demo booth over there, number 2, go look at it. It's really exciting on what you can do with the new release coming out. Any questions? All right, everybody knows what tax.com is now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the evolution of intelligent document processing. That's what the IDP is in this session. So this is one of my favorite slides that's always, or images that come up for IDP or IQbot. It really stands true today that 80% of your data is captured in this semi or unstructured area. So you want to use IDP or intelligent document processing to extract that information and deploy natural language processing and different tools and techniques to extract that value from the documents. All right, we're going to talk about the automation to transformation timeline. Yes, that's a lot of dots on there, and if you can't read it, it's okay. I'm going to go through it. So the first where we start is traditional document processing. You can imagine this is the man, woman going through flipping the documents and actually keying those into a program. Why is that a problem? Well, it involves humans. There's human errors. It's hard to scale. It's hard to identify those errors. We move on to the basic automation where we're introducing software tools, scannings, digitizing data. That's really was a huge automation back in the 90s of the scanners. Moving forward to the early 2000s, we start to see optical character recognition, OCR. That's starting to come to play. How many of you are familiar with OCR? I love it, right? It's like going to Adobe and hitting Control F on a PDF. I take that for granted that it wasn't there. They tell me all the time, Mark, I remember a day it wasn't, well, thank God it's not my day anymore. I don't have to do that. So moving on from OCR in the mid-2000s, we start to see machine learning integration. This is what we call our fixed form extractions. This is where your standard IQbot templates come into play, where you have a predefined template and format, and you can now start extracting information from that format. Moving on to the early 2010s, we start to see natural language processing. So now you don't have to define every variation of a word. In the world we live in, for AP invoices, account payable invoices, I don't have to denote invoice number, invoice NBR, invoice hashtag, INV hashtag. There's a lot of variations of the word invoice. And we actually did a study one time because we were looking at this and we had, I think it was like 80,000 invoices. The word invoice number it came through 180 different ways. So in OCR, you're kind of stuck with what you get. So instead of a B, it was an 8. It's like, okay, well, hopefully we'll get that and capture that as well. So that's where you start to see natural language processing. Moving on to the early 2000s, you start to see some of the evolutions of IDP platforms. And the key distinction here, these IDP platforms were purpose-built. So they weren't flexible, adaptable. They're really one issue at a time, built from an end-to-end solution using OCR, machine learning, and NLP. We move on to cognitive automation. Cognitive automation is the ability to start making decisions, letting the machine make decisions on the data that was extracted. And so you start to see that come up in the mid-2010s. And then in late 2010s, we start to see advanced data extractions. This is similar to doc automation, being able, I call these my shotgun models. I don't know what they do, but I throw up the data and I get something back, and I hope it's good. So you see a lot of shotgun models, and they're really great in terms of being able to identify more intricate, complex structures of documents. Moving on into the 2020s, this is the business process transformation. This is where we are today, that automation to transformation journey, where we're starting to bring in these task-based solutions and take a step back and connect them all together with the technologies that we have available. So that's what we're going to talk about later today, or Michael's going to talk about at least here in a moment. And then we added one more little tidbit at the bottom of the future, being able to take that predictive, the AI insights and forecast and make proactive decisions on a document that you have. That's probably going to be the future, maybe something we'll be dealing with shortly. Any questions or anything to add, Michael?
So Mario, I was going to ask, so you guys, of course, tax documents are typically structured and things like that, but also there's a lot of supporting documentation there. So how have you guys been looking at generative AI from the perspective of being able to do some of this future state, like predictive analysis and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we deal in, like I said, indirect taxes, property taxes, severance taxes. One of the things that we've been doing with our severance tax is we are looking at specific contracts and looking at transfer clauses for we can understand who has the rights to certain deductions or taxes. And so we're using generative AI to identify those proactively across contracts. You can imagine our legal team is pretty backed up and we have to send a lot of those requests in. So being able to use generative AI to identify those has been great. Also, we do a lot in the property tax space. We are looking for assessments and notices that we are getting from the states and trying to be able to identify ways. So this leads into our process because we're extracting assessment notification documents that we receive, and we're putting this into models to identify whether we should appeal those items or not, and what's the success of an appeal. So those are some of those end-to-end automations that we're using, leveraging generative AI.
So you can help me with my property taxes and...
Definitely in Texas, yeah. Texas is awesome.
Yeah, for those in Texas, property taxes is a sore subject. So, see if I can make this work. There we go. So if you think about today, like where we're really at a pivot point in this market. We saw that timeline there. For a long time, we've used these technologies, right? The zonal OCR, the machine learning, natural language processing, things like that. And the market's really matured, right? We're at the point where we're close to 2 decades where these technologies have been used to process documents. But if you remember that iceberg, right, these sorts of technologies work well for those structured documents, those semi-structured documents. But all that unstructured data, which is a large part of what organizations receive, even though when things are structured like tax forms, you end up getting unstructured data, and there's just lots of variation. And there's lots of challenges when using this technology to be able to process those types of documents because of those variations. So you spend a lot of time in maintenance and overhead. Like, Mark, you mentioned you guys have 1,500 different, essentially, groups, what we call them in IQBot, where you're managing all these templates. It's not that it's necessarily hard to set up, right? It's just kind of time consuming, right? But the reality is that a lot of these documents are probably similar. They're just different because they're different state documents and things like that, right? So I see the use of generative AI being a pivotal point in this market to really reduce that overhead of being able to, process documents that's never seen before without any pre-training and things like that. And then secondly, really reduce that overhead cost because you're not having to go back and continually train these models, right? It's not domain specific. It's our first generative AI solution that we've seen in the market. But at the same time, I don't want to discount these technologies, right? There still is a place, right? Generative AI is not going to come in and replace all of these technologies. Structured documents using zones is still going to be the fastest, cheapest way to do it, right? Same thing with semi-structured documents, things like invoices, right? There's tons of invoice models. We have invoice models here at Automation Anywhere that we've created. Use those, right? Those are going to be the best suited for those use cases. But for us, where we've infused generative AI into the technology, we believe that we can make those things better, right? So making the invoice processing better by using the invoice model first and then Gen AI second, or just using Gen AI in general, right, to be able to process these unstructured documents.
And I will say it all depends on what you're trying to automate, right? There's instances where if we're able to take this 1,500 IQBot learning instances and shave off 80% of the time, that's still a value savings for our team. We may not be perfect, or if we have a variety of invoices and we just need to be able to identify tax, Gen AI may be the right solution. But if we have one vendor and we are trying to get a specific field that may be uncommon, the standard templates work phenomenal for those issues. So it really depends on the use case. Don't think that Gen AI is going to replace everything and it's going to solve your problems. But we use a combination or one of those decisions to really drive our processing.
So audience participation time. So who, like Mark, has tested generative AI with their documents that wants to share?
We just compared our competitors' earnings calls, right? We've seen weaknesses, kind of a SWOT analysis, compare and see using that necessarily invoice, but was one of our first things that we tried to leverage to say, okay. We also took our existing earning calls to review transcripts to review what were the analysts asking our CEO and CFO, and kind of come back and say, okay, we predict based upon the last 7 earning calls, you would likely see a pattern here of a similar negotiating answer.
That's great. So how are you guys orchestrating those steps? Are you?
This is small scale experimentation.
Gotcha. Okay.
Performing is during the build up through our AWS DevOps system.
Okay. So you guys are using
As
AWS.
we experimented, we proved some cases. Now we're looking at bigger opportunities, but still there's a lot of risk, a lot of governance we need in place. So
Right.
we're basically saying we're going to do a few more use cases and then finalize our approach for 2020.
So that's a great way to start, right? So of course, we talked about security, risk, governance, things like that, right? I think having that human in the loop is super important, right? And one of the things we've done with document automation as examples where we've infused Gen AI is that, it's not like you're just going in and setting up generative AI by yourself. It's just a feature that's there, right? And we give you a controlled, measurable way to send those prompts. You're only sending the text of the document and not even all the text of the document, things like that. But starting off the way you did makes a lot of sense, right? So you can kind of test it out, get comfortable with it, but then leverage, an automation platform, ideally, us, to, manage that end-to-end process, manage that human in the loop, sort of situation, so.
And it's up data, that's the most important thing. Don't put our
Right.
proprietary data.
That is a good point. Yeah, try to find use cases that you're not, the data's not sensitive, right? So in that case, public data, things like that. But of course, these technologies that are available today from Amazon, Microsoft and Google, they're fairly secure. I won't say fairly, they are secure. These are services just like any other service you would buy from these hyperscaler vendors, that are available to you. So I saw some more hands back here. Anyone else want to share? No? Okay. So when you look at using generative AI for business, and it kind of to your point there, it makes a lot of sense, right? There are areas where it makes a lot of sense to use it, and there are, of course, areas where we want to be a little bit cautious, right? And of course, security is a big thing. One of the things we do, of course, with our integration is that nothing we send is stored, nothing we send is saved, nothing we send is used to train a model, right? So that's really important. But when you're looking at it just from a business perspective, right? Of course, composition, right? That's what everyone thinks of with generative AI. It's going to, create our emails, things like that. But the other piece, of course, is information extraction, right? So we're leveraging this technology, again, to extract information off documents and get those key elements. Summarizing documents, as you mentioned, that's a great example of the use case. And then, of course, code generation, right? We saw a lot of use cases where, we're going to be able to start creating automations using generative AI. But the areas where you want to be cautious of course, is it's not a search engine. It's not open-ended, right? This article here is kind of funny. It's usefully wrong. It's not always right? And that's where we see the Copilot application being really important part of any sort of generative AI product or solution that you guys build, just to ensure that you have those human eyes on it. And then you can add all the layers of validation and things like that against your systems of record. So let's dig a little bit deeper into how we process documents with generative AI, because it's not really just about taking documents and just sending it to it and be like, okay, let's see what comes back. Part of the reason is that it can hallucinate, as we talked about, right? So the more data you give it, the more open-ended you are as far as the information that's coming in, the less likely you're actually able to get the result you want, or predictable results, right? And at the same time, too, as I mentioned earlier, let's not discount existing technologies. When it comes to semi-structured documents, structured documents, things like that, we can augment those capabilities with large language models, but in this case, we don't want to simply look at them as replacing those large language models. But the first step in the process really is important for us is that we structure these documents before they're sent, right? So we OCR the document, if it needs to be OCR'd, we structure that text, and we send that structure with the prompt that you've defined, that question you have, and then we ask for structure back. It's going to make it more accurate, it's going to make it more predictable. It allows us to send only the information that needs to be sent to the models, right? And it helps us with the limitations of situations where there's only so much data, right, you can send to these models. There's limits. You can't send a 100-page contract. But if you needed something out of the contract, we can break that text up and we can only send the information that you need. This also helps in another way, right? Governance, right? So we're controlling what's being sent. You're seeing what the prompt is there, and that's it, right? It's not an open-ended chatbot, ChatGPT interface sort of thing, right? You're simply asking questions about the data that's on the document, and then we were returning those results of that data on the document. And then, of course, incorporating that with the other engines. We talked about classification, splitting engines that we have as well, pre-processing, et cetera, and that human in the loop to then in turn, go validate this. So again, highly recommend, go see the demo in the demo booth downstairs to see it in action. Wow, you can't read that, but if you could read that. Essentially, it's as simple as asking a question. And it seems almost too simple. You're like, really, that it works? It works? It does, right? And for me, I've been in this space for 18 years now. I've seen all the different technologies. I've set it up in so many different ways. It's just so simple, and it seems like it shouldn't be this simple. But if you could read this text, you can see here, so this is our interface, the control room. We have a query box here, and that's where you put your prompt. Again, it's controlled, right? All the integration, all that work behind the scenes we do to structure the document, all the pre-processing, things like that is managed for you. You simply come in here and use natural language text. And of course, you can play around with the prompts, you can different formats, things like that, but again, it's fairly easy. And one of the most important things we have as well, and again, you probably can't read it here, but the rules, right? So the field level rules, the document level rules. So traditional IDP solutions return a confidence level. I'm sure you guys have heard of that before. So the confidence level essentially is a percentage that is returned by the algorithms that says whether or not it felt confident that it extracted that information properly. Well, these models don't return a confidence, right? Because they're not IDP solutions. So we have to be able to add business rules to it. Otherwise, you'd have to have a human just check every single one of them, and we don't want to do that. But we make it really easy where you can, just click here in the same tab. You can add different rules, and you can do things like check for, patterns, formats, empty values, and things like that, and use Copilot, to allow that user to be able to manage those exceptions. And that's where Copilot comes into play. I think, it seems so simple in a way, right? Just embedding this technology in these applications, but it's so powerful, right? If you think about how you want to add new technologies in your organization, AI capabilities, and you think, oh wow, I've got to go create systems, new applications, things like that. I have to train the users on these applications. You have change management. You have resistance from the users in using these applications. But what if, in this example, you want to be able to process documents, whether it be structured, semi-structured, unstructured, and if there is an exception to any of the validation rules that you've created or things like that, you simply embed that in their application that they use every day, right? So you don't have to retrain them on anything. And in the end, the user doesn't even know you're using generative AI, and they don't care, right? They just know that those are being processed, and you can expose that directly into your applications of choice. Again, super powerful. Again, users don't have to learn something new. All they have to learn how to do is click the button in the little box in the corner, and then they can validate those documents. So you guys have seen this a lot over the past couple of days, but I want to reiterate here, right? So when we talk about automating documents, it's not in a silo, right? This really is part of a platform. It's around the process orchestration. We're not an independent, standalone document processing solution. we see document automation as a core component to helping you automate your tasks, specifically your document-intensive task, right? So whether it be integrating into an end-to-end workflow or whatever it may be, what's great about this tool is that it's built into the system, right? It's not a separate product that you install. It's simply, as you saw, available to you in the control room, and it's a feature that you can just drop document extraction directly into your processes.
I have a question, Michael. So what's the difference between doc automation and generative AI in the context of automation anywhere?
So that's a great question, because document automation is kind of a verb, right? You can automate documents, but it's also the name of our product, right? And document automation is a feature, right, in the platform. Generative AI is just a component, right? It's just an engine. It's like saying we're using an OCR engine or we've built a document-specific parser, like an invoice or something like that. So in the context of the users who are doing the development or the end users, right, they really don't know or won't know that it's using generative AI, and they really shouldn't care at the same time too. So.
Could I ask just briefly, what is the difference between document automation and IQ-bot?
Someone's going to ask the question. That's great. So the main differences between it are, first, the architecture, right? So IQ. What's the difference between document automation and IQ-bot?
Hey, I still owe you a drink, so don't forget.
So IQ-bot is a standalone application, right? So that was our first generation intelligent document processing solution. It was bolted on, essentially, into the workflow. What we've done with document automation is kind of rethink how intelligent document processing works, right? So as opposed to being a separate application, we've integrated it directly into the platform, right? So it's just a feature, it's there. If you have a license for it, you can use it. And then secondly, we've also added a lot more capabilities than what you see with IQBot, right? So we've added lots of new engines. We've incorporated other third-party engines as well from our partners like Google. And then, of course, we've added some of this generative AI capability. But we've architected it such that you can actually bring in many, many different engines. And we continue to create a platform that's open, which allows us to incorporate these different models very easily into the solution. So again, the main thing is the architecture, I would say there. And then the second piece is just the general capabilities, right? So with document automation, we can really support any document type. And I use any as a strong word because, of course, there's going to be you can't scribble across a piece of paper. Let's process that. But we've really expanded the use cases with the different engines that we've added to the solution.
One more, if it's not too long. When you say the engine, is the engine part of document automation or?
One thing before you answer, I think of it a little bit simpler. I think of IQBot as template-based models where I have to go and predefine where am I going to find this field and that field. And when we're using doc automation, they have models in there that already define those for you. Now, you can bring IQBot standard templates into the doc automation because the doc automation is not only the extraction piece, but also that component that shows you the PDF and the reviewer capability for the human in the loop. So that human in the loop extraction, that's considered the document automation. But for me, the models are really what drives the difference. Is the IQBot is purely a standard template-based approach, whereas doc automation has the ability for these other models that are more machine learning driven, and you can predefine, it identifies the fields for you, those keys and values.
You could use one, not necessarily, you need not use the other at the same time.
True, yeah. And Mark makes a good point. If you have IQBot today, you can actually use it inside of document automation because we see it as that engine, right?
But if you don't have IQBot today, you can just go straight to doc automation.
Correct, yeah. And to your question too around what I mean by engines, right? So we look at the extraction is there's really no one size fits all to extraction, right? There are different capabilities in the market that work for certain different document types and things like that. So what we wanted to do architecturally is really create this platform that allows you to bring in all of these different methods in which you can extract data from documents without you having to do all the integration and call APIs and stuff like that, right? We've kind of built that all into the platform.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Question?
All this leads to my question because we've got ActBot, we've got document automation. When I look at it, you said it right, the architecture. There's a lot more maintenance around ActBot as you get away from document automation. We've also used multiple OCR engines. We've used Abby,
So it's not OCR, right? So we OCR the document first before we send it to generative AI. But from an integration standpoint, yes. I mean, you can kind of think of it as the same thing, right? It's just kind of another engine we use behind the scenes, but it's not an OCR engine, right? We have to OCR the document first, and then we send the text. So not the actual document image, we just send the text to the generative AI engine.
Okay, so we get document automation, like I said, get back to lot, hated the group training, we'll use that on an instance. So document automation, so the simple thing is, don't go to ActiveBot, go straight to document automation. But now I look at document automation as having AI built into it as it's learning, because it's really learning very well. 4 or 5 times somebody does it, it picks it up. There, you got the OCR piece there, and you got it learning. So where does generative AI actually fit in this window of process?
So it's a method, and I'll let you guys. But it's kind of a method of doing the extraction, right? So one method of doing the extraction could be like the key value pairs, right? So you've got in document automation and IQbot aliases, right? So that's your keyword, and you can do patterns and things like that. So you can think of generative AI as just another method of doing extraction. So instead of having to do the key value pair or machine learning, you just do prompts. You just ask questions, essentially. So, but Mark, did you have?
Yeah, no, exactly right. And I think of generative AI as almost like a classification engine. It's going to go and identify those schemas for you. So you don't have to have a predefined, as we said, invoice number, invoice, NBR. It's already going to know that because it's been trained on other documents. So it's not taking the OCR and capturing it like IQbot is today with relationships of how far away is it from other keywords and values. It's truly looking at the text to infer those extraction tools, right? But IQbot's still something, I get you on the training of the groups, and you're like, it looks the exact same, but now it's a brand new group. I got to go train it. It's a mess. And doc automation used to was model driven, right? So it had, again, purpose-built models, one for AP invoices, one for driver's license. Now with generative AI, it basically just uses the LLM model to identify, and it's already seen those types of documents. So you're prompting it with the questions and the elements to extract for it can render on the doc automation component.
Yeah, and as long as the question across all documents is the same, like to your point, like if you have different doc types, then yeah. But if you have some doc types where it's like I need these certain fields or these certain fields, and then you create a specific model, or we call a learning instance, for that particular document to do that extraction. So.
And to all the other ones that you have already.
Yeah, exactly. So, question in the back.
Does document automate take care of handwritten content?
So,
Something that hyperscience does.
right. So we've got, and of course that's kind of more on the OCR side of things, right?
I'm sorry, what was the question? Sorry.
No problem, John. So he's saying, does document automation handle handwritten documents? And he said Hyperscience does a good job with that, right? So we have incorporated the Google Vision OCR engine. We've found that it does a really good job of handwriting. But we continue to add, different engines. So, if you guys come to us and say, look, this, like let's say a Hyperscience engine works really, really well for handwriting, could we potentially add that? We could look at that as an option. But right now we have Abby and Google Vision as the two options.
How's the roadmap looking for document automation? What are the other features there that you're looking to roll out?
So, yeah, that's a great point. I should have put a slide on that. But we've been talking a lot about generative AI, but actually with this release, with .30 release, which we'll start launching next month, we've got a lot of new things we've added to it. So we've added some new pre-built models. So there's bills of lading, arrival notices, packing lists, and I'm missing the fourth one. What is it, Alex? Waybills. Yeah, and waybills. So that uses a combination of kind of traditional, machine learning approaches as well as generative AI. Of course, like we've added that unstructured document type. Another very common request we've seen is scripting, right? So it's something, if you have IQbot, you could do that in the past. So now in .30, you can add scripts to manipulate the extraction pre as well as post validation as well. Alex, what else am I missing of what we're doing .30?
That's it by SDK.
Oh yeah, that's right, the SDK. So the other big one too is a software development toolkit. As you saw, especially in the early days of document automation where we've integrated different engines, we started with Google, like we've got Google.ai and things like that. And that's an integration that we built. But what we've done now is we've opened up the platform is if you have a customer or you guys have your own IDP solution of choice that you say, I've already got this, could I integrate it into the automation success platform? This new SDK allows you to do that. So if you can create a package to call another solution as a service, right? You can actually now incorporate that package and build a learning instance with that package and leverage, of course, Copilot, leverage our validation interfaces and things like that. So it really opens the door to expand if you have a solution where you've got a really complex document type and you found like this one engine that no one knows about. As long as they have APIs that you can call to do that extraction, you'll be able to do that with this new SDK capability. And the great thing is, as a developer, you have all of this, of course, under one umbrella, right? It's one interface where you manage all your different document types regardless of your extraction. All right, any other questions?
The document types which contains the social security number, how do you guys handle that?
As far as redacting that information or just?
The tax documents, they generally contain sensitive information like social security or maybe other PCI, PCM data. So how does the engine handle that, or is it not something that is sent across?
So as far as, and that's, here Alex, I'll give you a microphone. That's a great question for you. So I don't know if you guys heard the question. So PHI data, right? So when you're sending, information like from a tax document to the generative AI models, how are you handling this? Are you sending that information across, or can we redact some of that information? So real quick, let's introduce Alex. So he's one of the product managers for document automation. So he's our resident, kind of more technical expert. Is it on?
Hello, guys. Can you hear me? This is a pretty complex question. So if you don't want to expose that personal information with like third-party services, just don't use them. So we have our models that are running on premises. So you can use AB OCR that can be executed just on your local machines. And you can use invoice or other models, user-defined models, that also will be executed on your local machines. So in this case, the data doesn't go outside of your premises. But in some cases, if you need to process that data, SSN is not basically a big problem if you have security review from your company that they agree to send specific data to that location, and we can provide you certificates that we have, like SOC 2 certificate, type 2. We have other DPA agreements that we expose what exactly we do with your data. So we do not use your data. We don't use content from documents for training. We don't send that data to anyone else. So we honestly expose what we do with that data. And if your security review okay with that, so you can use those services. But it should be like a specific decision, like what kind of extraction providers can be used in your specific case. Simple solution, don't use third-party engines. It will be on your local machines. If you want to use third-party, you need to pass that security review. Make sense?
All right, any other questions? Hang on, John. Let me ask him.
So thanks for describing this. How long have you been using this GenAI?
So we're going GA in next month, right? But we have been testing it, for some time now and developing it, for this past year. And we've been testing it with customer documents and had some early customers that have been using it. So
Good luck.
it works pretty well. I mean, it's It's surprising, to be honest with you, because everyone like that knows me, I'm skeptical of these types of technologies, and I was impressed. So, yeah.
And you can see that on the booth, so you can go to the demo and see that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll go check it out.
Any other-
And so, as a service capabilities, are you planning for government users to go through FedRAMP?
Alex, question. So I don't. Do we have any FedRAMP with the platform?
So we had plans to certificate and that FedRAMP stuff, but it took too much time. You need to find like a sponsorship or something like that that will help you to do that. And I think it's still in plans, but not finished yet.
You gonna help us sponsor? Perfect. Yeah. Question.
So with the new feature of GenAI, document automation, is it an additional separate service or is it part of the same document automation? It requires say X number of pages. Will it cover that or you have to buy some additional?
So we've got 7 different SKUs now. No, it's actually. Right. Yeah. No. So you'll actually be excited to learn that it's just part of the existing document automation SKU. So if you are an existing document automation customer, you get the new GenAI stuff. It's included now. Yeah. What's the question? You do not, by default, no. Yeah. So it's a separate license and SKU. Yeah. Any other questions? Great questions, by the way. I like audience participation.
But if you only have IQBot, talk to your sales rep and get it into doc automation because it helps. It truly does. So don't forget that.
You're saying doc automation is a more intelligent version, essentially, of IQBot, especially with this, what do you call document categorization? What do you call it? Classification, where it can look in and it has an understanding.
Yeah, so that.
What invoices, something like that? That's what you're saying? It seems to know what
We do. So we came out earlier this year with a new advanced classification engine as well.
Right.
So we've always had the classifier with IQBot, but the new advanced engine, what it does is allows you to do things like define rules. So look for certain keywords and phrases in a document, so you can be more granular.
You're making it more intelligent, essentially.
Yeah.
Put into it.
And just some more advanced kind of machine learning capabilities as far as like giving it samples for especially unstructured content, or even things like invoices, which are complicated because they all look the same, right? And yeah, but they're not. Yeah, so it's a little more intelligent, from that standpoint. And that's, it's a package, right? So it's not necessarily part of document automation, but we look at it as part of like the end-to-end solution flow.
Yeah, they didn't have that 5 years ago when we did this. And so if, just the maintenance alone is worth going to doc automation, because if I can, there's no need for me to go and retrain groups of only 3 documents, right? And we're doing that today because we're trying to keep up with keeping clean the production instances. But if I was just to use this and only for those troubled documents have a secondary process to use IQBot, that would be a much better approach for us now. So just, if you haven't played around with it, encourage you to play with it. If you can even get the Gen AI component now, right, that's a part of it, it's just even better. So certainly take a look at it.
Thank you for all the information.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, lately you have a lot of experience with this type of projects. The process of training the model, once we have a learning instance that will not recognize all documents, as a developer team, do you rely that responsibility to the process owners, or you have a special support team that helps the process owner for several times when the model was being trained?
So of course it depends on the model, right? So with the, like for example, the invoice model, right, that uses kind of standard machine learning capabilities, it's really the end users as they're validating those documents, it just learns over time. So you as an administrator don't necessarily have to go in and train it. Now when you first set it up, you'll probably train, some of the larger, higher volume ones. But then like with generative AI, for example, you don't have to train anything, right? You literally just give it prompts. It doesn't have to have any context or anything like that. So it's much, much easier just from an overhead and administrative standpoint. Of course, there are still like fixed forms capabilities in the product as well, right? So with what we call standard forms, you can add 5 samples of a fixed form document, and it'll be able to use zonal OCR to extract that too. But you have options. Ideally, to Mark's point, if you can use GenAI, it's a lot less overhead. There's a lot less maintenance because you don't have to train anything. All right. Any other questions? So it's on, what floor is that? 5th floor? Oh, it's 3rd floor. So it's 3rd floor, demo booth number 2.
It's right across from the ballroom, the
main
keynote
ballroom.
sessions.
Yep. Okay.
So we don't need to buy ChatGPT license.
You do not, nope. So yeah, so it uses OpenAI on Azure, so the OpenAI services. It's our instance, so you don't need to buy the licenses or anything like that. So it's all included. Yes and no. And I guess, and that's a good question for Alex, because the engines themselves, don't care about the language themselves, but I think, there is some limitations, right, just in the interfaces and things like that from a language standpoint, but I'll let you
Yes,
answer that.
currently in the user interface, you will see English only, but basically I tried that with the different languages. If we are talking about GenAI specifically, that model, GPT model, can extract data from different languages. I even tried with Japanese, and it works. But in the user interface, it will be English only. We will expose that later, so that's in our plans to add more languages, especially European languages. But currently, you will see English only, but you can ask questions and prompts using different languages, and it will be able to handle that. And good news that we use Google Vision OCR for that, and it supports multi-language documents. Even if document contains several languages in one document, it will be able to extract that properly.
To follow up to that, will it then translate to English for any output or any uploaded data into your system?
Usually it's not our use case. The translation, you can do translation then as a post-processing step, like in RPA automation, right? So you can translate it using the same GPT or other services. But even before validation, you can do that. It's kind of a step that you can put between extraction and validation, but it's not automatic.
Quick technical question, version 29, 28, 30, best for this?
30.
I'm talking about 30, so you want to go
Yeah,
straight with the
30.
not at 30.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, one more question. Good question. It depends. I think by the end of October, like all tenants globally should be updated. That'll be our target date.
It will be available for cloud only right now. And on-premise version will support GenAI in subsequent release, that is December, January.
Yeah. And if it's in the, I don't know if you have it today. Okay. So if you have a sandbox environment, it has already been updated. It got updated last week, so you can start using it in the sandbox. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Yeah.